Hello there my RPG lovers and welcome to another video. Scars Above is a new action-adventure game coming out on PC, current gen and last gen consoles.
Haven't encountered these things before. I hope it stays that way.
I didn't know what to expect from this game because I went totally blind into it. Scars Above feels like a blast from the past when it comes to some of its features. It's a linear, story-driven action-adventure, and that's not something we're seeing that often nowadays. So is it any good? Well, let's find out, shall we? The story in Scars Above has a very simple premise. The humans have discovered an alien object in the space, and they sent a team of astronauts to check it out. You play as a character named Kate, one of the crew members of the Scars unit. There is a very brief introduction to the Scars team, which doesn't give you a lot of time to get to know these characters. You only get to learn some basic mechanics, and there is one cutscene before the game actually begins. You pretty much spend the rest of the game searching for Scar members on this alien planet.
What is wrong with Richard?
The presentation is pretty decent, even though Scars Above is obviously not a AAA game with a huge budget. There are 5 chapters in the game, and most of them have different looking levels. The visual variety of levels is not amazing, but the game has a couple of different themes going on these levels. It's not a monotone environment. The voice acting is solid all around, and the art style for the environment is pleasant for the eyes.
Bite marks. They were shredded into pieces. They must have been killed by those monsters nearby. This was someone close to you, wasn't it?
These character models look pretty outdated, but they are good enough to take the story seriously, I guess. Although I don't think the game gives you enough time to start caring about these characters, it all happens too fast. That doesn't mean the story is bad, it's actually quite decent, and Kate is a likable character.
I need to find a way out of this place.
However, the tone of her voice is almost always the same, which is a little bit off-putting in serious situations.
Thanks.
Right after you arrive on this alien planet, you start seeing this alien, who basically becomes your guide. Apparently, some other alien is modifying the DNA of all creatures, which turns them into abominations. Some of the Scar team members suffer from the same fate, and Kate will try to save them.
I have to follow these coordinates. It's the only way to help both Tam and Mike.
Yeah, she's a little bit delusional. I mean, look at this guy.
It's the only way to help both Tam and Mike.
I don't think you have the facilities for that, big man.
The operation of the alien tells you that her people suffer from the same fate as well. You're left to discover what's actually happening and possibly locate the rest of your team. That's pretty much the story of the game. It's not very deep, but I wouldn't call it shallow either. You'll start learning more about the origin of the aliens, and you're constantly discovering the alien flora and fauna.
Log entry. A predatory worm-like creature capable of subterraneous relocation.
Overall, the story remains interesting and mysterious throughout the whole game. For the most part, the dialogue is well written, and like I already said, the voice acting is decent. My biggest problem with the story were definitely the characters. The game expects you to care about them, even though you only knew them for a couple of minutes. So what about the gameplay? Well, I'm glad you asked. Scars Above has a very simple formula for the gameplay. Kate gets to use a couple of guns with different elemental effects, which you have to utilize in combat as well as for puzzle solving. The combat was my biggest concern, but shooting mechanics in this third-person action adventure are not bad at all. The controls feel responsive and the guns you're using have a good feedback. You have a dodge button with iframes, which you'll need to use a lot, and besides the 4 guns you also have a simple melee attack. Although the melee attack is only good for small enemies, and as a utility weapon for reaching some optional areas on the level. Kate will gradually unlock these 4 weapons, and the game will try to teach you how to use them effectively. The issues I have with the game when it comes to this is not exclusively related to Scars Above. Like I said, the game is very linear, yet the developer felt the need to handhold you throughout the whole game, basically.
If I destroy the power sources, the laser grid will shut down.
I really don't understand that design decision, especially in linear games. Even a 12-year-old will probably figure out what to do, so you should think twice before you try to explain a simple game mechanic over and over again. If you stand there for more than a couple of seconds, Kate will just casually tell you exactly what you need to do.
I could try using my new chemical device to break through the metal barrier nearby. These icicles look unstable. If I shoot them, they might drop.
It's very annoying and pretty stupid. Not all of the puzzles are like that though. Sometimes you will have to use your brain a little bit, and the presentation for puzzle solving element is very good actually.
There appears to be 3 power sources. Each power source is connected to the top of the console. The bloodstream is full of foreign bodies consisting of an unknown alloy.
You can tell that developer put a lot of love into this, because there is some very nice attention to detail here. These particular sections are not exactly puzzles, you're just observing and learning about the subject in a well-presented scenario. That makes sense from the story perspective, and it gives a very nice flavor to the atmosphere of the game. Scars Above has a step-by-step approach to discovering what's going on in these scenes, and it's fun to experience these segments when they happen for the first time. That's a big emphasis on the first time, because the game will make you do this all over again when you die. I started the game on hard, but somewhere in the chapter 3 or 4 I just switched to normal. Not because the game was too challenging in combat, but because it started to get boring to repeat some sections all over again. This game has a simple checkpoint system, and the level design is pretty decent for a linear action-adventure game. But the game starts feeling very frustrating if you die a couple of times, especially when it happens close to the next checkpoints. You'll have to repeat everything you did up to that point, and that's not fun at all. Not because the combat is bad, but because of the enemy types, or more specifically, the lack of them. Scars Above has only a handful of enemy types, and all of them have the same gimmick. You have to shoot at the weak points with a weapon that matches the elemental effects, and that's pretty much it. It's almost never about unloading your clip on the enemy, it's all about shooting these specific weak points. That's not a bad thing, and the game does a good job with the enemies it has, but it gets really old really fast. You're going to see all of the enemy types in the game in the first hour of gameplay. After that, the game just throws the combination of these enemies at you throughout the whole game. You will need to use the environment sometimes in fights, which can make these fights much easier, but that's not exactly solving the issue. There are some light survival elements on some maps, which were the cause of most of my deaths because I just forgot to check my health bar. On a more positive note, the game gives you a good amount of different gadgets that you can use in fights. Most of these gadgets can be useful in fights, but your main focus is definitely the 4 weapons. And by mixing these weapons you can deal increased damage to some enemies, or use the environment to cause even greater damage. For example, you can hit the frozen lake a couple of times with your fire weapon and instantly kill the enemy. This feature is pretty cool, but it felt a bit underdeveloped. They could have been way more creative with mixing these 4 different elements on the weapons, but I guess that all comes back to that lack of enemy types problem. You're either shooting the enemy in the chest or the back, while doing a dodge or two. That's the whole combat loop, which is a shame, because the core shooting mechanics are not bad at all. When it comes to boss fights, it's basically the same philosophy, but on a slightly bigger scale. I will only show you a snippet of the first boss fight, but you won't miss that much, because there are only around 3 or 4 different boss fights in general. I don't think the boss fights are bad, not at all actually. Although the game repeats one particular boss fight, and the fight is almost exactly the same, with a couple of added mechanics that don't mean that much. Kate has a simple line of progression, which only consists of 2 different skill trees with only passive skills. You do get a couple of active abilities that are not related to skill trees though. I already mentioned those gadgets before. The way you obtain these skill points is by looting these little boxes all around the map and increasing your knowledge about these alien planets. Most of the skill trees are useful because they will increase some basic mechanics, but it's not a very exciting level progression. The soundtrack in this game is almost non-existent, so I don't have a lot of things to say about it. You will hear it sometimes in particular situations, and it sounds pretty generic to be honest. The environmental sounds are also pretty subtle, but they get the job done, I guess. The sound effects in combat are pretty good actually. A large part of my critique about the gameplay could possibly be disregarded if we take in consideration that this is a pretty short game. It should take around 5 to 7 hours to fully complete it. Scars Above definitely doesn't overstay its welcome. The developer knew exactly what type of a game they want to make. A short, linear action-adventure with decent third-person shooting mechanics, light puzzle-solving elements, and a mysterious alien story. If you can overlook the problems I mentioned, I would recommend checking this game out. I'm not sure about the price for the game, but if it's around 20 to 30 bucks, I think that would be perfectly fine. If you like linear action adventures, of course. Anyway, tell me your opinions about Scars Above in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video, and subscribing to the channel would mean a lot. If you want to go a step further, you can always support me on Patreon or as a YouTube member. Many thanks to all of my current supporters, and I'll see you in the next one.